everyone, and welcome to another episode of From the Mount, a podcast from the campus of Mount Perrin Christian School. I'm your host of the podcast, Steve Kyle, back. It's a new year, Viola.
New year, new you.
Yeah. But Viola Lucier in the
Hello,
co-host
all.
seat today. Welcome, Viola. And again, depending on when you're listening to this, it is a brand new year.
It is.
We're not talking about New Year's, but I mean,
I do love a new year, though.
a lot of people do, Viola. To me, January 1st was no different than December 31st.
No,
That's how
it's
I look
magical.
at it. It is. I know. Other than I'm home,
Yes.
that is magical. So, but today's episode, again, maybe I'm excited about every episode. But I really am. Not only do we have a great topic, we have great guests with us today, people who have been on our podcast before, but are here really as experts. So it's going to be awesome. We're talking about, this is the third and final in our Pep Talk series, something I start every year with, and we decided, hey, let's do a podcast about these. We've done a lower school one. We've done a middle school one. We're now to our school one, and this is the final one, at least under the Pep Talk series. And there's a lot of content. We got to get right to the content, but let me first welcome our returning guest with us. First of all, our head of our high school, Mr. Jason Beer. Jason, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
Great to have you back on. And if we're talking about high school, we got to bring you in.
I
the
appreciate
guy who
that.
deals with
Yeah.
all the good and great of high school.
It'd be interesting if I wasn't on that
Exactly.
podcast
Yeah.
as
Be like, why
being in
not
our high
him?
school.
Yeah. And then also back we could have had around the lower school one, the middle school one, the high school one, the one for even grandparents if we did one.
Right.
We could have her on that, but Tawanna Rusk is back with us. She's our associate head of school. Tawanna, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you
Awesome.
for having me.
Yes. I mean, we could bring you on as an expert in so many ways and places. And
Amen
so,
and amen.
I'm going to take that as a compliment and not that
yes.
I'm really old.
No,
No.
not at all. No, we don't. It's not. It's wisdom that you're oozing. I guess
Oozing.
when you get older, it might not be the only thing that oozes. I don't know. But no, it isn't. But honestly, as part of our panel, what's interesting about this is we've got, of course, parents of high schoolers.
Yes.
Myself, a parent of two recent graduates, and I say recent, in the last 5 years, I've had two girls that graduated from Mount Perrin. Tawanna, you've had two graduate through Mount Perrin as well, and are now into
And a son-in-law.
And a son-in-law that here, and now you're a grandparent. So we're going to get this perspective on this idea of high school that I think is going to be rich. It's going to be helpful. And then, of course, Jason, every single day you're in the throes of high school.
Yeah.
Every aspect of high school. There's
Love
not,
every day.
I bet
yeah.
you even dream about it.
Yeah.
Probably so.
Yeah. Yeah. But so we're going to get right to it. So if you're familiar with our Pep Talk series, and you've listened maybe to some of our other ones, these are really foundational and built from our mission statement, which again, if you are hopefully a part of our community, you know that our mission statement is about providing academic excellence in a Christ-centered environment. Mount Perrin unites with home and church. That's where these kind of flow from.
Right.
Our desire to build strong relationships with the home, to prepare our servant leaders to honor God, love others, and walk in truth. That's where we started with these and recognizing how can we strengthen that partnership with the home, and developing these pep talks was part of that as a resource. And then we've shifted them to focus on a biblical worldview. It's been a priority for us across the board, for us to understand that even as a school we're to do that, but as parents we're called to parent through the lens of a biblical worldview. I think it's one of the most important things we need to do, but as parents are not doing. And so that's where we're kicking this off from the foundation that not only does everyone have a worldview, but everyone has a but we as Christ followers are to be parenting and leading and living through this biblical worldview. And again, I talk about, and we're not going to spend time because there's so much other awesome information I want our those of you to share with us. But I want to set the groundwork for this because I think it's important that when we're parenting and doing this through the lens of a biblical worldview, it's consciously and subconsciously, intentional and unintentional, and then it's through our family, friends, and media. And so, Viola and Tawanna, this is obviously specifically for you two. Give me, when you think about that, Give me ways in which you've recognized you've parented both good and bad, both consciously and unconsciously. Like you realize later on, oh my goodness, I was actually teaching an important, maybe not even a good lesson. And I wasn't being, you know what I'm talking about? Like you
Yeah.
realize, you look back and go, oh man, I think I just spent 2 years unintentionally teaching a lesson that I either was really glad I did, or in my case, I have examples of, man, I wish I would have been a little more intentional with that. Do you have
Mhm.
anything that comes to mind when you think of that? I mean, one that comes up
Well,
that
it's
quickly?
not a specific example, but what I would say is, so Logan is 30, Peyton is 27.
Yeah.
So they're grown adults.
I feel old right
running
now.
their own
Yeah.
households and doing those sorts of things. But I think as they matured through college, right, and you start having different conversations,
Yeah.
they are remembering things. And of course, they will remember the thing that you did wrong. They love to bring up your parenting missteps
Yeah.
when they're older and have a good chuckle. Or, I bet you didn't know, you know what I mean? Like they try to
Correct.
tell you all the things that, you didn't know about. But I think that the unintentional parts of parenting have become more evident as they've matured.
Mhm.
And we go back and have conversations and are like, hey, when you drew a really hard line about that time that I lied, in this situation, oh my gosh, I was so upset with you. You made me go over and apologize to these people. I was,
Yeah.
so embarrassed. But they're like, but that moment it shifted something, in me that, okay, lying is a no-go. Like, right? Like that Christ followers, we own it when we lie.
Sure.
We make it right. They're like, it was such a hard lesson. I didn't love it in the moment. And I thought you were making way too big a deal about it.
Mhm.
But now that I am a parent, it's like, oh, I'm going to do that too. Right? Like I
Right.
want to set up these very clear, sort of principles
Yeah.
that we're going to operate by as a family. We're not always going to hit it right, but you held our feet to the fire.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
no,
you
for sure.
didn't
And-
just,
Yeah.
oh, it's okay. You were too tired to deal with it, or you said you meant it, but then you didn't follow through. The consistency.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And the wisdom in that is, number one, we can all agree, parenting is not easy. If you're listening to this
No.
podcast, one of the most
It
good
is not.
parenting is even harder.
It's
And the
every
wisdom in that
day.
it has to be intentional. And I think what's
Yeah.
sad about 2025 now is I think so often parenting is it's too much of it's being done unintentionally.
Mhm.
And sometimes it works out. You're like, oh, wow, God, that worked out. And then other times you're like, wow, I didn't realize my kids were really listening to those conversations I had and the impact it was having, both good and bad. And so if you're listening, hopefully you understand that if you're like, no, this parenting part is really easy.
Nah.
I might just say, maybe you're not doing it well.
Yeah.
Now, you might be. Maybe
Questions.
you just get amazing children,
Right.
and that's
Right.
possible. But if you're like, no, it's a piece of cake. I've got 3 high school kids, and
They're
we've not
amazing,
had
yes.
any conflict. You're like, okay, let's
When you
talk.
say that, they'll
Yeah.
never like they never before. But I will say, in terms of the parenting thing, it's more just I have a couple key topics that I think are really difficult, but what not only you say, but what you do. So you cannot sit there and tell your child, you need to go do X, Y, and Z, and you're not doing it yourself.
Mhm.
That's huge. And then I would say some really emotional topics. That's when you sometimes unintentionally put down the Jesus and your flesh comes out. So,
Mhm.
when you talk about like friends or grades,
Yeah.
things like that,
Sure.
parents get really emotionally charged. And it's having that wisdom and that moment to just be like, okay, I got to walk away and I got to really think through this before I blow up,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
before I send off an angry email or angry whatever, or say something or insult something.
Yeah. Well, let's then transition right into kind of the high school years, because if you're listening to this, you probably have a high schooler. Maybe you have a high schooler up and coming. Maybe you certainly know someone with a high schooler. And so we're going to get right into kind of these high school years and quickly go through. And it's really important. The reason we cover these is because it's really important we understand what to expect and what they're going through before we can really respond to it. And if you don't know, it's helpful to know. And so we're going to kind of go through some quick points, and you guys are going to share some unbelievable wisdom and insight. I just know it. But let's start with this first kind of obvious one, but one that I know I didn't think much about. And that's that not all your kids are the same. So many of you are listening and you're like, well, I already had a high schooler. It went great. It was so easy. And I'm just going to do the same things with this high school kid.
Nope.
And we do. We try to do that. And then we get frustrated and recognize that not all our children, we all have multiple kids. And in our case, we all have girls. So we're like, oh, we have girls. They're kind of close-ish in age. This is going to be a piece of cake. I'm just going to do it right with the first one. Right click, copy, paste with the second.
Nope.
And then we realize, it doesn't happen that way.
And
so,
both of all of our girls, one's totally different than the other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is. And it's
100% they
Yes.
are, Miss Rusk.
Jason has taught both of my children, so he knows how different they
well,
are.
he had, but both of my kids went through while Jason was a part of the high school and teaching assistant and now head. And so, he recognizes that. And I think it's really important. So mom and dad, if you're listening, you have multiple kids. They're not the same. You need to know each one of them and actually get to know them, because it impacts forever how you will discipline, how you will communicate, how you will engage with them. It's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
Kids are different. Jason, no doubt you've seen lots of siblings come through.
Oh, yeah. So Tawanna's daughters, I get the joy of teaching both of them, and they are very different. And one of the biggest things I would say as an educator and a teacher is we as educators have to know our students.
Ooh, yeah.
That's one of our most important things. If we don't know our students, then what we say is going to go in one ear and out the other if we don't really know who they are. So even as small as it seems is making sure, if you've taught siblings, calling them by the correct name.
Yes, and not so-and-so's sister or brother. Yes. Oh, that grinds my gears.
And if it's that important for a teacher to know their student, equally, or how much more important is it as a parent to really know your kids? What worked on my oldest daughter for discipline, for communication, was not the same. And if I continued to try to do it the same, there was going to be frustration, disappointment, unmet expectations. There's going to be broken relationship. And so it's really important, if you've got multiple kids, that you really find out. Moms and dads, by the way. Dads, if you've got daughters like I do, it's your job not to say, oh, well, Mom, you got this. They're girls. You're a girl. You handle it. No, actually,
both parents,
make sure you're...
both parents need to engage. And what I would say to you is, somebody said this to me recently, and I think I said it in a meeting we were in, and it resonated with everyone. It is not my original thought, but it means something here. Parent the child God gave you.
Yeah, not the one you want them to be.
Not this dream that you maybe had, or, and in that is that whole thing with siblings. If you have an only, you have to parent the child God gave you in this stage, right? Like, where are they at today? Take them where they are, nurture them, parent them, guide them to where, they need to go. But you also can't, they have different giftings, whether that's academically, artistically, athletically, personality. They're all, God designed each one of them. They're different. They're the way God wants them to be. And so to put the same expectations on Peyton that I had for Logan would not have been right or accurate or fair.
Yeah.
Not that we compromise the biblical principles we have in our household. I'm not saying change the standard, right, of what we've agreed upon in our home that we're going to do, but the way that we go about approaching that with each one of them to get them to understand it, to get them to buy into it, to get them to execute it is different.
Yeah, that's good. Jason, of all this next point, when you get into high school, for the most part, because if you're a parent of a middle schooler, you're questioning every life decision right now. Why did I ever decide to have these children? What type of child is this? But by the time they get to high school, for the most part, there's a leveling out period of some kind. Now, I'm not saying everything gets perfectly great, but do you see that for the most part, these unstable kids by maybe sophomore year or so at least begin to find their niche, their group, their people at some point? Oh, for the most part.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the biggest thing to understand and kind of talk a little bit about what Tawanna was saying is, each kid is their own. They're an individual. They have their own hopes. They have their own aspirations. They've watched you as a parent excel in the field that you're in. And while they admire you, love you, see what you do, they may not want to do what you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is super important for a kid to feel seen and known and loved. My dad played college ball. That's not my dream. And it's those conversations and working with a parent to help them understand as well. They're not quite the same, and you can still love them the same.
Yeah.
Even though they may not have the same hobbies and interests. But it's important to ask those questions. What do you love?
Yeah.
Right? What brings you joy? And they're trying
Yeah.
to figure out their passion.
I was thankful my daughters early on said, Dad, no disrespect, but we definitely don't want to do what you do for a living. Both of my girls had said
Rude.
that. They chose colleges like, that's going to limit me, Dad, to pretty much what you do.
Right.
And we don't want that. No disrespect. So I'm thankful there was no pressure for my girls to, hey, you want to be like Dad? No, they didn't want to. But what about finding their, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, going back to kind of what you just asked about with
Yeah.
the, your child, they do kind of level out. If you ever are like, is this normal? I can't tell you how many times I've had moms call and just say, hey, we're going through this right now. Is this normal? 9 times out of 10, it is normal.
Mhm.
I would say first semester of 9th grade year, there's still 8th graders.
Yep.
And so they're still kind of like weird and
Yes.
like, squirrely. And then something clicks over Christmas and then they come back and they're a little more mellow. And then, by senior year, they are just acting crazy. And that's why you go to college because, you got to get out of my house because you're acting grown and you're not.
Well, I think what's important too is there are certain life stages. When you think about a kid coming into your 10th grade year, you got a couple of those early ones that are already driving.
Yeah.
Like they get the prime
do.
spot. They're the only sophomore that gets to select
Taste of freedom.
their parking spot.
Yeah. And it does. It changes.
And it's
dynamics.
a level of independence. They're
Right.
finally a little bit freer.
Mhm.
They're trying to figure out who they are separate from you, but at the same time, they still want to know that you're right there.
Mhm.
That there's a little bit of
Yes.
a cushion.
Oh, for sure.
It is
for sure.
middle school has its changes. You come in as a 5th grader and you leave as a high school freshman. There's nothing quite like it.
Mm-hmm.
But high school, you're still in the protection of your parents' home. You're still in the protection of Mount Perrin. But you see this end, right? This launching is going to happen. It's coming for you. You're hitting the end of the runway, right? It's like, I've got to take off. And they feel so much pressure as, kids
Right.
to
Right.
figure it all out. And in this day and age, of raising kids, if I was right now a high school parent for the first time, I try to always empathize with what's going on in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how have things changed? And I know there's a lot of pressure in high school around college decisions,
Right.
around careers. And I get it. But to the ultimate point that you kind of started us off, right? The reason why we do these pep talks, the reason why we're having these conversations is we're trying to be a community that can help one another stay rooted in the biblical worldview about parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I know that a lot of parents that we all work with and talk with, that fear is driving some anxious behavior in parents, which is trickling down to our children.
Right.
And so my encouragement to parents listening to this is like, grab a hold of yourself right with the Lord. Talk to him about what you want your parenting to look like. What's your ultimate goal, right, for your children? Like, if you take it down to the very bare minimum, what I care about is that my kids are in heaven with me
Yes.
for eternity. That's what I care about.
Yeah.
That's what I
Right.
care about.
Yeah.
Well,
And so if that's what I care about, then some of these other things, I can take the pressure off of some of these other decisions. What college they go to is not necessarily going to determine whether or not they're in heaven with me.
right.
Right. So,
Well, and something I've heard all three of you all say, if our student is going to have a hiccup and something happen, let it happen in high school when we're all there to help.
amen.
Yeah.
Amen. This is a safe place to make
Correct.
mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It may not feel like that when you're in the midst of it,
Mhm.
but it really is. I think one of the things too in parenting, and I could be jumping around, but it's just it was on my heart to make sure I said today is that you want to raise mentally and spiritually strong children. Well, one sure way to make sure that you don't do that is to do too much for them, to rescue them.
Mm-hmm.
It's to not let them solve their own problems, to not want them to ever suffer any consequences, any suffering or pain. Like that, I understand why our parent heart tenderly wants to do that, but ultimately that's not best for them.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, and I think talking about the high school years and what to expect, that's what we want from our students. We want them to step in and have conversations with adults. We want them to advocate for themselves. There's this component of scaffolding. We're not going to throw them to the wolves, right? This is why, as a freshman, if you need to meet with a teacher, more than likely you might pop in to see your counselor first to get some feedback on, hey, what do I need to say so what I want to communicate comes across clearly and not defensively with a teacher.
Yeah.
And so by the time you get to be a senior, though, you're doing those conversations quickly. There's a lot of that. Parents feel
Can't
like,
get them
hey,
to stop talking.
no. You got those that can't wait to get out, and those that are clutching not to leave yet.
Yeah.
And you want a balance of that. And
Good stuff, y'all. I'm going to lump these next few together quickly, moving through, because I just think it's important to say, but we're going to kind of move on, and they're obvious, and you might be experiencing that at times our kids can, and I'm doing air quotes if you're not watching, which most of you probably are not. They could be embarrassed by their family. When they get older, they start to push away in the sense of, hey, just like I want to sit by myself. We're going to the game together. You sit with the old people. I'm going to go sit with my friends. Like you're going to wave, you're going to say certain things, and I'm going to pretend you don't exist. That's normal to do that. Viola, you talked about all these types of, they might seem self-centered, moody, or impulsive as part of, again, that independence.
Correct.
And we see that in the classroom. We see it in the hallway. You see it on the playing fields. We see it. Now, I always say, though, it doesn't mean we're to accept as parents rude, obnoxious, or moody behavior like,
no
I heard on a
disrespect.
podcast. Correct.
No disrespect.
I heard on a podcast that it's normal, so I'm going to let you talk to me the way you. No, not at all. I'm just saying it's not like, is something wrong with my child?
Right.
Do I have the only defiant, defensive, moody, irritable sophomore boy, junior boy? The answer is no, you don't. But the question is, how are you going to manage that? You can run, you can cower, you can allow it, or you can say, how do I lean into this in the way that is pleasing to Christ, that's going to provide the structure and guidance they need through those difficult times. So it's recognizing it's going to happen. It's normal that it happens. How are you going to manage that differently than you may have managed it with your other children? Because it's going to be different in the way that they're going to respond. So I think it's important you recognize it's going to happen. So,
and I was going to just tag on. I know we're trying to move through this, but I think the biggest thing, and we've talked about this a little bit even before we started recording, is listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your kid at times is going to want to deflect. They got a lot going on, racing through their minds and their hearts, but the moment you suspect something different and they start talking about something, you're like, oh, this is interesting. Why are they lean in, ask questions, don't give directives, don't give, hey, this is what I did. Just listen. Ask those really good questions of, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about that.
Right. The open-ended, well, how'd that make you feel? Tell me more.
Yep. Especially because they're not going to talk as much. Both my girls were super talkative through elementary and middle, and one remained that way without being prompted much. But one kind of, wasn't that she hated us, or she just developed differently, and it required going, I guess I'll just wait till they're ready to talk to me in 5 years. They're not going to talk as much. You might go, not my kid. My kid won't shut up. So you may have the child that's going to talk all the time. And I'm not saying that every child won't, but it's normal for your kids not to. But that doesn't mean you go, well, I'll be here whenever you want to come back to it. And we'll talk about the solutions to this a little bit later on.
Communication, though, I wish I had done more of this. So it's not something I did, but now looking back, I wish I had. Is just, number one, I find that sometimes they always want to talk to you right as they're going to bed.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like they're done with the homework. They've finished the practice. They finally got something to eat. They've
processed it.
And now they're up in their room, and it's like, okay, you're trying to shut down your house for the evening, and then they're standing in your bedroom and they're sharing, and you're like, at 10:45 p.m. now we want to have this conversation. But don't shut that down. The temptation is to do so, right? Like, oh, we need to go to bed, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Like, when they're kind of on the roll and wanting to, pour yourself a cup of coffee and
embrace it.
Do it.
Embrace it and stay up.
It's worth it.
And I think too, creating some moments for them to be able to talk. So I had girls, but my two best friends they all had boys. And so, carpooling and all of these things, I was the carpool mom in the morning and somebody else was the afternoon. And they would always crack up at, golly, your girls get in the car and it's just like information download. You know what I mean? And my boys get in the car and,
good.
Yeah, they've taken a vow of silence, And I would have the boys in the car and I would come back and be like, oh, Jake told me this, Andrew told me this, Mitchell told me this, Matthew told me this. And they're like, what do you mean? What do you mean they told you that? Like, why would they tell you that? They didn't tell me that. And I watched a little bit, and moms sometimes can pepper with questions.
Yes.
That just shuts it down. If you get boys talking about things they're interested in, sports, their favorite sports team, the game last night, or, hey, you're really into, I saw
Fortnite.
this, about this video game. If you get them talking about something they enjoy, then that then opens up the dialogue for more.
Correct.
And deeper things that they might be willing to share. My encouragement is just to make space for that in the busyness of parenting and working and all of those things that high school kids want to process themselves and maybe with their friends before they come to you.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's okay would be my encouragement.
We're going to get to that, that we're going to touch on that exact thing. And I love that. And a little bit later on, and potentially in part 2 of this discussion, because this is rich stuff. But this is a big one that we're, it started in middle school, starting earlier, but dating and sexuality become a primary focus in middle school. And again, it's the reality of what is school. And I just, it is, it's, so be aware of that. Don't avoid the topics we say, just know that those with dating and sexuality being a focus, you should already have, these should be conversations parents should have already talked about, like when our girl's not, when she comes home almost engaged as a junior to her boyfriend,
Oh, by the way.
Yeah. And you're looking at each other going, so what we were going to do with dating anyway? Were we going to let her date? It's going to be a reality, and don't shy away from it.
Right.
Don't. It has to be something you're prepared to say, hey, what is going to be my plan when this comes up? And again, I think you guys all can speak into this. Things get busy in high school. And when I say that, middle school parents right now might be listening going, what do you mean? It's so busy in middle school. And I'm like, buckle up. Because if you think it's busy in middle school, it
worse.
Gets, I mean, give me, Jason, Viola, both of you, kind of a day in the life of some of a current high school student, the average one, and all that they're dealing with.
Yeah. So this is, they're navigating 8 classes throughout a whole year, which seems like a lot. And one of the biggest things that I think we've done the last several years is to introduce our middle school students to that schedule already, which has really helped kids settle a little bit more.
Sooner.
And
yes.
a lot
They do a better
sooner.
Job.
And one of the things that we do as well is we know kids need breaks. We all need breaks. We need an opportunity to take a pause. And a couple of things that we have done over the years is introduce what's called a personal responsibility time. Again, this is that moment in which we're trying to prepare your kids to head off to school so that you're not over their shoulder going, hey, you got to do this. Hey, you got to do that. Hey, did you do this?
Right.
Hey, did you do that? They may come out of a test, back-to-back tests to start your day, and we have personal responsibility time. And that might be a moment for you to take a deep breath, go sit and have a conversation, grab a coffee from the Roost, or play a little cornhole if you want. Now, some measures in place where if kids are maybe playing a little too much, we're going to have some conversation to help them, to guide them
But
and
they
scaffold.
really love it, and they do a
Correct.
great job for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
they
the
do.
busyness too for parents, like, because I can imagine some parents heard my earlier comment, like, don't do too much for your kid.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're also dealing with a student who, and your child is the one that forgets everything, and they don't have their uniform, and they forgot their backpack, or they don't have their laptop charger, or, like,
Right.
they're
Yeah.
that kid. I've parented that kid as well. And my encouragement would be, like, yes, even that child is the one I'm saying don't do too much for. Just let a couple of natural consequences happen.
Correct.
Right.
Let them sit in that, and then talk about how can we make a plan so that doesn't happen again, right?
Mhm.
And help them. That's how you help them, is thinking through how to get it done. But the busyness of high school is real.
It's so
The
real.
coursework academics,
Yep.
they participate in the arts, and we want
Yeah.
them to.
Yeah.
We want
Mhm.
them in the play. I want them in the choir, in the band, in the orchestra,
Right.
in the dance. We want them to play sports.
Yeah.
We want
What-
them to be
real
a part
quick, though,
of
with
all
that,
of that.
what's the percent? I mean, we that are either involved in a sport or the arts or something of one kind. It's
I
got
was
to
gonna say,
be
you just said this.
90%. What is the number?
If I had to take a ballpark, it's somewhere between 85 and 90.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a
I did a
lot.
quick poll even with
That are
the-
involved in, and many of those people,
Mhm.
multiple sports and theater on top
Correct.
of that.
And
Not
it-
only that, but they're doing. They have jobs. Some of them,
Correct.
because they want that coin. They
The Bitcoin.
Oh yeah,
They-
well,
but they-
easy now. A little
they-
Bitcoin.
It is. And not only that, but they're doing travel ball and
Right.
they're playing
Correct.
in the things,
Yeah.
and then they're like, well,
Well,
I
and
got
they're
weekend
trying to
stuff.
maintain a National Honor Society
Yep.
status. Or, also I will just say this, like, I've parented 2 different academic students. And so oftentimes the student who is not doing, quote unquote, so well in school is working the hardest.
Right.
Yes.
Your struggling student might be working harder than your student that has
It's
straight
easy.
A's.
Yeah.
It's work to be here and attend. It's work to focus. It's work to remember to get things done. But they also need the outlets of all those other things we were just talking about
Mm-hmm.
Right.
to counterbalance the struggle that academics might be. They need to excel in the arts. They need to excel in their athletics.
right.
They need to excel in their mission trip work. Like, you do want to have a well-rounded experience, but I do know in society and culture right now, we overbook our kids and we
Oh,
let
yeah.
them overbook themselves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like
It's almost a badge
you can
of
do
honor.
it all
Yeah.
is not really true.
Or the business.
At what
No.
Yes.
at what expense? I've been a mom in high school who teachers were great. They recommended my child to take, the honors, or they recommended the child to take the AP. She's crying all summer long through her summer reading.
Mhm.
She's flunked the first 2 assessments
Yeah.
in the AP course. And I'm like, at what cost are we
Yeah.
doing this? Like, let's just back off of it.
Cool.
And I think that's why it's important to really, again, drive home, talk to your kids, right? Ask them what they want. And then sometimes you have that overachieving kid that you haven't said a thing of your expectation for them academically yet. They
Mhm.
want to achieve the top of the top.
Yeah.
Yes.
I still remember we had a former graduate, and she was a valedictorian, and she got on stage and she goes, I wish I would have been with people more.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I chased this goal so hard, and when I look back, I see the opportunities I missed to invest a little bit more with some of my friends because I was
That's right.
chasing,
Yeah.
making sure I had the top grade in every single course. And so
Mhm.
sometimes as a parent, you have to ask yourself, hey, if you're thinking about your highly academic kid that wants to take 5 APs their junior year, you may need to have the conversation, which of these is going to come natural to you? Because
Mhm.
we're going to get rid of one of them.
Yeah.
And let's have that conversation of what that really looks like to help create some balance so
Yeah.
that you can
Yeah.
do that.
Can I
And-
circle back to your first question in this part? We had 2 parts, the busyness of the schedule and the dating.
Yeah.
Can we circle back to
Absolutely,
that for just
yeah.
a second? And I do think that this is a very personal choice as parents, right? Like, what are your rules going to be around this? But my encouragement would be that, to your point, don't just let it happen to you. Be thinking about it, be talking about it,
Mhm.
right? This is going to date me so much, y'all, but when I was young, my dad's rule in our house, and I was the oldest, was you can date when you have your driver's license, when you can drive a stick shift and an automatic,
Oh, cheese and crackers.
and
Yeah.
when you can change a tire.
What?
Mm.
And I was like, change a tire? What does that
I knew
have
I
to do
liked
with
him.
dating?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it was his old-fashioned way of, number one, making sure I could take care of myself. And if I
Right.
needed to get away from somewhere, in his mind, it was like, I don't want some boy driving her around in a stick shift and she needs to get away and she feels like she can't.
Yeah.
Right.
She can steal any car.
Exactly.
She's not going to
Hot
look at the
wire.
window and go, not this one. It's a
Yeah.
standard.
It's like, I can get out of here. And I think he thought that it would prolong me dating if he throw the tire in, right? Like
Yeah.
it was like a panic move of
Yeah.
like, well, I'll just make, well, you can better believe by the day I turned 16, I could change a tire, I could drive
Oh,
a stick.
yeah.
I was like,
Yeah,
I'm
you were
going to get it done.
practicing.
So, but he tried, right? But so I think that, you know, there is conversation that can be had,
Yeah.
you know, about when do you want to have group dating is okay? When can you hang out with a friend? When do
Yeah.
you want to label certain things? You know, one of my parents' rules around dating, and I don't know why this was such a funny thing to me, but it stands out, and hopefully it'll bring a couple of parents a chuckle. But my parents really, back in the day, you used to like give each other your class rings,
Oh,
Oh,
you know, to
wow.
wear, like to kind of signify that you were
Sure.
a couple. Or you would wear each other's Letterman jacket.
Yes,
You know, you
that
wear
I
the
know.
Letterman jacket, all that kind of stuff. And my parents were big, hard no on that. My dad felt like that was like someone
It's
claiming me
engagement.
Yeah.
or engagement, or
Yeah.
it signified something too serious. So I was not supposed to do that. And I got sick at school one day. I was a junior and I was really, really sick. And I rarely called home, but I called my mom and was like, I really am sick. I need you to come. And so she did come. And I got in the car and I leaned like my hands on the dashboard and kind of was putting my head down because I was just so sick. And she was like, what is that? What is what? She's like, what is that on your hand?
Nothing.
And I was like, I'm like, Mom, it's his class ring, but I'm so sick. Can we just like deal with it tomorrow? She's like, hey, we cannot. No, we cannot.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness
We'll deal
gracious.
with
And
it
she was
now.
like, no, walk back in there, find him, give it to him. You're not allowed to have it. No. So I'm like doubled over. Like I actually stopped and got sick in the bathroom to go find this person and give back a ring. But again, it was an example for me that, hey, we set rules as parents.
Correct.
Right.
It
And
was
be
Around
consistent.
certain
intentionality.
things, and
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
say it, we mean it, and we're going to follow up on it. So
Mhm.
for the dating part, I do think you need to decide sooner
Yeah.
rather than later what you want to do as parents. When are you going to let them go solo to something?
Never.
Yeah.
What are the rules
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
people being at the house?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That is
Bum, bum, bum.
you want to really set super strict
Yeah.
parameters. If you have a basement, if you have a
Mhm.
media room, what are the rules going
Mhm.
to be about that, right? What are the rules of,
Yeah. Ring cameras in every room.
Exactly.
Mhm.
being in each other's
Notifications.
bedrooms, because the dating rules then parlay into, as your kids get older, you've got a child who's married now too. Okay,
Yeah.
so what does that look like when you're serious and engaged?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Does.
is it ever,
Sure.
was Kever ever allowed in my bedroom in my parents' house? Like, we were getting ready to be married. That would be a no.
Mhm.
Unless he
Saying,
wanted to
like-
be shot,
Yes.
then no,
Correct.
it was not.
No, that's
Yeah.
no. There's no reason for that. So I just, my encouragement would be to have a conversation about it. And then also talk about, if you are going to date, then what are the rules of
Yeah.
that going to look like
Sure.
for boys and for girls? Kids they will act like they don't want to talk about it, but they will appreciate you kind of fleshing it out and teasing out, well, what happens if this goes down? What happens if
Yeah.
someone says this or offers this? Or, what if you go to their house and their parents don't have the same rules as us?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Right?
Can't go
Like
back
we
over.
said that these are the
Mhm.
rules, but you go to their house and they say, no, it's okay.
And they're bad parents. Yeah.
No, it's
I'm just kidding.
it's their level of like, they may have a kid that they really feel like, oh, that's going to be fine.
Right.
But we still
Yeah.
want you to follow our rules.
Correct.
Mhm.
And
Correct.
parents who have kids who are dating need to be in conversation with one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
When
Yeah.
it happens.
Right. Like when you
Correct.
agree that
Yeah.
they're going to date, I think that is a very helpful and healthy thing for the boys' parents and the girls' parents to sit down and at least,
Yeah.
have dinner together and talk about,
Sure.
okay, this
When
is
they're
what
in high
this is
school,
going
if
to
you've
look
got
like.
like a 30-year-old that's starting to date, I mean, don't do that. The last part of this section, and actually this episode, this can be two parts here, is and I think this kind of goes to that. Stress and anxiety go way up in high school, because not that grades don't matter in middle school, they do, but for the kids, that switch flips, and there's this immediate. They're already concerned in your office with, I'm getting a B right now as a freshman. I'm not going to get into Georgia or Georgia Tech. Like, I'm already out. And you're like, whoa, that's real, isn't it? In high school.
It's a real stress.
It is. And actually, today we are in a 10th grade classroom just talking about colleges and how to find colleges and how to navigate a website. But we started off with, there's over 5,000 colleges out there. And, just to kind of think outside of what we hear on ESPN or what we see on Instagram, we tend to kind of only look at the same handful of colleges over and over, but there's so many things out there. And the biggest thing, we are not inviting God into that process.
Yeah.
So we're just like, okay, we can control the grades, so we're going to do the grades. And then, okay, we can do this, and then we can do that. And then I'm going to take this test, and then I'm going to go here. Like, at what point was God a part of the process? And then also, too, parents are so petrified of making the wrong mistake of sending their kid to this specific college, and then they're going to suddenly become like, living in a van down by the river. But the reality is, even if you did your own thing and that was not what God wanted for them, you don't think, that's God. You can do whatever, and
I think
his will.
I think, Viola, you hit on a really important part, and I think it's in Proverbs. I think chapter 16. I could be wrong, but man plans his ways, but the Lord establishes his step. So it's important to plan, right? We don't want to neglect, and you don't want to get to senior year and then all of a sudden ask the question where you want to go to school. It is important to have those conversations, but it's also important to remember God may not be leading you there.
Correct.
There's story after story, and I don't have time to go into a lot of details of even some of the kids that I've watched graduate, go off to school, or I've watched that they missed their dream school, and then 6 months later they come back and sit down with me, and they were like, "That's the best thing that ever happened to me." In the moment,
I've heard that so many times.
It feels full disappointment is what it feels like when you don't get the school you want.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
But when we have rightly established that the Lord is going to take care of us, the Lord is going to take care of your kid. He sees them. He knows them. Scripture after scripture in the book of Peter, he cares. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares. And so he knows. And it's important to hold the weight of that. So then when we are disappointed or we are excited because we got in, we can see those things in the perspective of which they are currently.
Yeah. I think Jason, we're gonna let that be the we got more info we got to get to.
Yeah.
So we're gonna if you're listening, you're like, oh, that's so rich and so good. It is. It was 43 minutes of greatness. But we've got a part 2 kind of to this that we're gonna kind of give you. What might that look like? You've already heard so many good nuggets, but I think there's a little bit more we want to unpack a little bit, and so we're going to shut this episode down. But hopefully the part 2 is already out, and you could just hop right to part 2 and go, man, I want to pick up where we left off. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to have the same guest right back on this next episode. And but let me say thank you for listening to this episode of From the Mount.